Okay, so welcome to our webinar from Public Council and Cadre on participatory action research and complicating our ideas around data and community-led monitoring efforts. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get into the meat of this training. So you're all on mute right now. You can chat us in the chat box. You might have to just click on the chat box to make sure you can view it, but you can ask us questions that we'll be collecting as we share information. And my guess is because we have so many participants that that's going to be the best way for people to ask questions because of all of the background noise of having multiple folks joining everyone. So, okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. We're really happy to have Maisie. You want to say hello, Maisie? Um,
Here I am.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just wanting to make sure that we had your audio correct. Thank you, Maisie. So we're really excited to bring together this training as part of our fixed school discipline training series with our really close partner, Maisie Chin, who's the executive director and co-founder of Cadre, Community Asset Development, Redefining Education. In South Los Angeles. And my name is Ruth Cusick, and I'm a senior supervising attorney here at Public Council. And I know that lots of folks are joining us over these last couple minutes. So in a couple of minutes, I'll kind of remind people of just the protocol around asking questions. But let's go ahead and get into it. So we're just okay. So first, we just want to share, we know that probably a lot of folks have seen that recently California Department of Education just released data for the last 2 years, and our partners at the UCLA Civil Rights Project, the Center for Civil Rights Remedies, just released a report called Lost Instruction, the Disparate Impact of the School Discipline Gap in California. And so we just want to acknowledge, that we have a lot of partners doing, a lot of amazing work from a more traditional end around data analysis. And so we really wanted this training to be, complicating our relationship to data and community-led inquiries and what really like data as a different tool. So, but wanted to, lift up our great colleagues at UCLA Civil Rights and have folks check out that report. And I'm going to turn it over to Maisie pretty soon to really lead us in a really exciting dialogue. But before I do that, I just wanted to share with all of you about the long-standing partnership that Cadre and Public Council have had around this work. So those folks who know about the school discipline and climate and racial justice work that has happened in LA already know about the amazing work of Cadre, but Cadre parents really led a community effort to be one of the first large urban districts to pass school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports as the foundation of all of the school discipline and school climate work in our district. And we have been collaborating very closely basically since that passage. And we first together released a shadow report called Redefining Dignity in Our Schools on the first 3 years of implementation. And so we're really excited to have continued the work all together this through now more than a decade of work. Before I pass it to Maisie, because I know some other folks that have joined, I just want to let you know that we're having all of you on mute through the presentation, but we're going to ask you if you have questions throughout the presentation to just simply enter them in your chat box, and then when we get to the end of the formal part of the presentation to get to have some discussion, we will we'll be able to take those questions, and then we can also have a way that people, if they really want to get to share their question verbally, that we can just unmute you to share your question, so we can also do that. So thank you all for joining us. So now what I'm going to do is actually just give me a minute, folks, because I'm going to make Maisie our presenter, so that we're going to let her share her screen so she can control the PowerPoint. So thanks for bearing with us for a minute. So, okay, great. Now, take it away, Maisie.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me, and if you cannot, please let me know in the chat feature. I'm talking through my computer, and hopefully there's not too much background noise or anything like that, but I certainly hope this comes through okay.
You're clear.
So, all right. Well, I want to appreciate everyone for joining and taking time out of your busy day. In the other time zones, I know it's a very busy part of the day. I'm out here in Los Angeles, so we're really excited to be able to share the wisdom from so many years of work, in the hopes that we all, what we do at Cadre can support our broader movement, and most importantly, just taking some power back into communities' hands to really monitor and interrogate how implementation is happening, so that we really do have more power in our communities to hold the system accountable, because we have, collectively as a movement, we have passed some amazing policies, and we have done some amazing work to bring a lot of ground truth to the surface in front of policymakers. And we have seen lots and lots of districts pass many positive policies, but as everyone probably knows, the vigilance it takes to make sure that it actually benefits students, families, parents, en masse, at large, is the protracted struggle that we're up against. So I want to say a couple of things for context. One is that you will see the word parent, and if you don't see it a lot, I do want to emphasize that Cadre only organizes parents. Everything we do can, of course, be applied to organizing young people, but for some reason, when I say that we organize parents, people still think we work with young people. And no, we made a very clear choice many, many years ago when we started, 16 years ago, that we would specifically focus on parents. So whatever I say, I would love for you to imagine grassroots, marginalized parents stepping into their own power and doing this participatory research. For some of you who I know are on the phone, that's not hard to imagine. But believe me, when I tell people that we work with parents and you somehow don't picture parents doing this, and that is why it's so important for us to share this work, because we really need to change the narrative. Secondly, given all the focus that has been on restorative justice, you will see that we are leading off with SWP by S 10 years later. And that is also not by accident. We helped pass SWP by S here in Los Angeles a decade ago, and despite the growth of restorative justice, we have continued our vigilant monitoring of SWP by S as the foundation of transforming systemically school climate. So this is not to say that restorative justice or anything else is less than PBIS, but I do know that sometimes we do not clarify for ourselves why there may be still strategic value in focusing on the implementation of SWP by S. And granted, the same thing could probably be done for the implementation of restorative justice or any other programming that's come about because of our policy victories. So two things: parents and SWP by S, kind of like the OG policy that started it all. And I invite you all to really think critically and imaginatively about what we can do with PBIS so that all the other things we know schools need really have a mandate. So, okay. Oops. All right, so one of the things that we did is we really marked the 10th anniversary of SWPBIS, and we came up with three main questions. How have harsh discipline practices been changed through the adoption of SWPBIS? How have disparities in discipline changed? And how well has it been implemented specifically in South LA, South Central LA schools? This is the place where most good policies go to die. You know, the conditions here in South LA are often the ones that lead, you know, the testimonies and the experiences often lead to the policy change, but then this is also where the policies that we help pass never get implemented. So this paradox is really, really important as, you know, we're doing our best to build power through this participatory research and not just do it to do it. Before I go into our findings, let me go back and just say that, as Ruth mentioned at the top of the introduction, that we're trying to complicate data. And what we mean by that is not just look at suspension rates, not just look at the data sets that the federal government or our respective state governments or our school districts put out, but trying to look between the lines and ask deeper questions and look for better data that fills in the blanks that we know much of the institutional data does not give us. And so, you know, we look at participatory action research mainly as a process for building power, for developing leadership, for developing critical consciousness among our leaders so that when we go out there and engage the decision makers, our parent leaders can be exceptionally strategic. They can tell when they're being, you know, when the institutional folks are trying to manipulate them or trying to answer their questions without answering them. And so our goal is that our parents can stand in their power when they are organizing and advocating because of the participatory action research work we have done. Last but not least, it's the power also of seeing their stories and their experiences turned into theory, if you will, you know, actual patterns that then we can lift up as more than as something beyond stories, but patterns that we really feel the system has to address. And for parents in particular, that is extremely important. That has been done more so with young people's stories, but has unfortunately not been done with parents' stories, and we humbly hope to, you know, change that through our work. So I have to admit that I don't do these webinars very often, so I'm still trying to remember what I have in my slides and trying to make sure that I give you all the right information in the right order. But first off, you know, I think that we have up here some findings from our latest report, which we just published on October 27th. It is entitled, How Can We Love the Kids But Hate the Parents? You know, and it is a parent-led investigation into the unfulfilled promises of SWPBIS in South LA in particular. So what we found, both in our broader South LA schools and in the 20 schools that we have cadre leaders at. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize, Ruth, but the slides are a little bit out of order. So I just wanted to talk about the fact that we did a couple of things. We requested school data with the help of Public Counsel, a very extensive data set from the Los Angeles Unified School District. We also went and downloaded information from the state, and then we also, cadre had also had data that we had collected, and we merged all that together. But the most important thing about the public records request was that we literally asked schools, about 111 schools, to give us evidence that they had implemented And in particular, we didn't ask for every pillar of SWP-BIS, but we specifically asked for the 3 best practices under PBIS that include parents. And so they had to show us that they included parents and how, and they had to show us that they reviewed data with parents. They had to show us that parents were part of it. And so that, I think, is our where we tried to innovate and where we tried to complicate the data. We specifically went in looking for, we knew full well that they had not involved our parents because we had been monitoring for years. And in the most important ways, they had not involved parents. And that when even though our district really no longer is supposed to essentially almost rarely suspend students, that the students who were still being taken out of class through illegal suspensions or in-school suspensions that weren't being documented or being sent home illegally, that in those cases, you know, the lack of communication and accountability to parents was extremely stark. So we wanted to add to the data that was available to us, and I urge everybody to think about this. You know, we also did parent surveys to see how many people in the broader community knew about SWP-BIS, and we also had focus groups with parents. And then we, as a team, had to figure out how best to condense all this data, run the numbers, if you will, so that our parents could look at it critically. And one of the important things that we did is we made our own rubric. Again, this is about complicating the data. We made our own rubric that went beyond what the school district uses to judge its own implementation. Now, mind you, I will give them credit. They definitely have a pretty rigorous rubric, but what it doesn't do, it does not emphasize parent participation and parent inclusion, so that we made ours that would do that. And you have on the screen, you have an example of how we define excellent implementation for the parent participation. Let me see if I can get this PowerPoint to go accordingly. But you know, we did excellent, we did promising, limited, and insufficient. So we came up with that. We borrowed theirs and we came up with ours, and then we looked at what we call the binder data, because schools gave us all of their evidence of parent participation in binders, or I should say evidence or lack thereof, and they gave it to us in binders, and we literally looked at binders and looked at the pieces that they put in there and judged them, you know, looked at them and decided whether or not it was insufficient or any of the above. Our team-based, so for the first indicator, we really looked at whether or not they used a team to implement SWP-BIS. And here we have just the percentage in which percentage of schools who had evidence in which category. As you can tell, most schools were in the limited to, promising to limited categories. And this is actually probably the easiest thing to implement, because it's basically like call a team meeting, but we specifically wanted to see if parents were part of those teams, if they were being led, and if also there was an administrator present, but most importantly, whether or not parents were part of that team, and whether those parents, if they were part of the team, looking for whether or not they were also reflective of the, of the school population and students who were being disciplined. Our second thing we looked at was database decision making. Here is where we really thought we would notice some major unfulfilled promises, and we did, which is that in the team meetings that there will be regular review of discipline data, and with parents. So in other words, if parents are part of the team, and if those team meetings then therefore included a regular review of discipline data, and that did the team use data to make decisions about implementation and troubleshooting their implementation with parents. So not to anyone's surprise, both the South LA schools at large and our 20 schools have very little evidence that they share data as per the policy, and certainly that, that also meant that if there were any parents on that team, they also didn't get any data. And last but not least, our other indicator we looked at was parent involvement, community collaboration. We asked us to show evidence that they were working with parents in the community to do the alternatives to suspension, to bring in, you know, more community knowledge so that people could be more prevention oriented. And similarly, there was very little evidence of that collaboration either. So I want to say that, you know, I'm highlighting this part of our inquiry and this part of our data analysis because this was the part that was the most participatory. Having parents across language and all kinds of life experiences sit together and actually look at the evidence in these binders was very, very enlightening and eye-opening, to say the least. Parents saw the different ways in which schools were trying to show that they had evidence and how limited that evidence really was. And so parents got to see in real life, you know, how administrators believe that they have documentation of parent participation. And that was probably one of the more eye-opening parts of our process. And it obviously agitated our parents, and we actually ended up developing, you know, recommendations that were really focused on process and participation of parents. So because LA Unified has been doing this for a while, you know, for better or for worse, our suspension numbers look fantastic on paper. And there has been a remarkable decline in actual out-of-school suspensions. But as such, you know, as we probably know, the racial disparities and the gender disparities and the grade level disparities still exist. So we knew that, and we knew that we had to put a different narrative out there to bump up the implementation so that it was truly transformative. And so what we have focused on is really how much the school has to embrace and love. And by love, I mean, you know, political solidarity with parents, bring them in the process, and ensure that the full promise of SWP by S is fulfilled. So you know, our demands really focus on inclusion, representation, and respect. Parents being part of the SWP by S team at every single school in South LA. And in particular, making sure there are both Black and Brown parents at this table. And then we have process demands, which are too kind of hard to put on a slide, but just to sum up, we have process demands, you know, inclusion and participation demands at the school site level, the local district, and the district level. And, you know, they all come out of our data that shows the complete exclusion of parents. So our demands, unlike some school, you know, some demands, they are very focused on including parents and telling, you know, and we definitely have recommendations to how to do that. I'm just, here again is the title of the report with the URL to access it off of our website. Excuse me, we are in the middle of getting it laid out in Spanish, so we just finished translating it, and we will also have a Spanish version available next month. So again, I just want to kind of emphasize how much we need to complicate the data, ask questions around data, and work with our communities to think of other data that we can ask for, or think of other questions that will lead to an inquiry that is broader than what the data, than just what the data set is. That's what we have learned over our 16 years and our 12 years in particular of working on school discipline, that we have to ask these deeper questions, that we have to make sure that school discipline is not seen as just reductions and suspensions. We have to go past that. And all the other data that people put out from the government, you know, that should supplement a community set of data, a community set of questions. But the questions that should be answered deep, you know, are the ones that are the hardest to answer, but they're the one that the community can answer. And then so we're starting turning things upside down and having the community data be, the community questions lead to community data, and have that data be central in our research. respond to the other data sets and the other reports that come out more secondarily, if you will. So I'm going to pause, and I believe I'm going to pass it to Ruth.
Okay, great. And Maisie, do you mind just clicking, since there's only like 3 more slides? Is that a okay? So thank you so much, Maisie. Those folks who know me know, and when we shared the report just less than 2 weeks ago, I shared with folks that I feel like I've kind of grown up with Cadre. I've been an attorney for almost 10 years and have had the really great privilege and really humbling honor to get to work with Maisie and the other organizers and all of the parent leaders for the entirety of my career. So I'm just so thankful at the way that this model has changed the way I see issues and really changed the way I think about community power. So just wanted to highlight a few of our tools before we open it up, and we did want to make sure we were thoughtful in not wanting to have too much of our time together be in presentation form, so we can really hear from you and what your questions are. But I wanted to share that our project has created a toolkit both for our educator partners and for our community partners, and it lifts up the kind of these transformative practices and the really exciting things that are happening across the state. So our website here, Fix School Discipline, is there at the bottom of this slide, where either the educator or the community toolkits can be downloaded. And then we're also with any of our partners in California would be happy to collaborate, on a joint training of the community toolkit and to bring our toolkits to your members. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So as Maisie shared that we really want to see a community inquiry leading data investigation, and like Maisie shared that there's been so much progress around the documented suspensions in LE Unified, where we now have a district-wide suspension rate that is well under 2%, that even our ideas about what are the data that we need to know to understand what's actually happening in our schools is so much more complicated than school suspensions. And so we have this section of our community toolkit that goes through different data resources that are available to complement and augment and be a part of community inquiry, and sort of as Maisie has shared, what is already happening from parents, from students, and thinking about how the data fits into that that full narrative. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And so folks, know we're all, very excited that the California Department of Education has recently released school discipline data for both the 2015 and 2016 and 2016-2017 school years. We have a link here to where you can get that data, and then if you download our toolkit, we have step-by-step instructions about how you can search for different levels of data, whether you want to look at data at your school level, at your district, at your county level, and by expulsion, suspension, and willful defiance suspension, and then be breaking that down by the most relevant demographic information. And I think, the link here with all of the work that we've done in support of Cadre's monitoring is really thinking about, when you see that there has been really significant progress on the decrease in suspensions in our state, but that the racial gap has not shifted as much, as we would want to see it shifted if we were having real transformation, that the kind of parent-led monitoring and inquiry that Maisie just walked us through is going to be the important questions and investigation that actually get us to the heart of the matter of why we can't, really get to the vision of racial justice that we would want to see in our schools. So just because I wanted to really get to focus on this really exciting and unique model of cadre, I didn't want to take all the time to go through, like spending many minutes going, here's how you'd go to CDE. So I'm definitely happy to connect with folks offline if they would, want a sort of initial, inquiry, data training for any of your members, but wanted to keep it really focused on, complicating our data points that we know are going to actually get us to the heart of the matter around racial justice in our schools and school climate practices. So great, thank you. So what I'd like to do now, we really wanted to focus the time on getting to hear from you all and see what questions you had. The first was a question from Dan about whether we'll be sending a link to the PowerPoint. So we're more than happy to do that, and we're doing the recording of the webinar now, and so we can definitely send the actual, a PDF of the actual PowerPoint and the recording to all of the participants, and so that folks can feel like we're able to have a little bit more of a discussion. What I'd like to invite you to do is you can raise your hand if you kind of open your box of about the attendees. You can raise your hand and then I can just unmute you so that you can actually have a conversation with us without us having to unmute everyone and hear, everyone's all the amazing life happening around them as they take in this webinar. So we would love to hear from you and really have a discussion together. So I'll give folks a couple minutes to see if they have any questions or comments, and just to share again that we're happy to share our community or educator toolkits with you all. Happy to connect in person, to do collaborative trainings with you all around these best practices, and how we really use community-led inquiry as the focus of our work and data as something that complements, that can be an advocacy tool in that inquiry. Okay, so I see that we've had a question come in. I will go ahead and read it to everyone. It says, if you have a school district which is majority Black and Brown students and the racial disparity is still very large, what are some of the factors that can factor in the criteria to fix this? Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand that the question is that there's a persistent racial disparity, and what are the kind of possibilities and solutions around trying to actually address racial disparity. Hopefully if I got that right. Okay, great. Thank you, Robin. I don't know if you want to start, Maisie, or if you want me to try to start to answer.
I will give, I will express some insight that I hope really provokes us, actually, because so at Cadre, we actually believe that, in our case, the racial disparities are for Black students in particular. We didn't have the data cross-tabulated by both race and gender, but certainly that means boys and increasingly so girls, but Black students across the board. And then in our context, there's been a huge demographic shift. So while the schools are so Black and brown, instead of African Americans being the large majority, it has increasingly decreased. It has steadily decreased to where a lot of our schools are maybe 10, maybe 15% African American, but more likely 10% and below. And so when the disparities continue to exist in that context, it is extremely important, in our opinion, that is really looked at critically as also racism towards the families in general, and therefore the demand that parents be brought in and be, where there's transparency with parents, where parents are, in this case, Black parents are brought in to be, early on to make sure things do not escalate into situations requiring law enforcement or arrest, where we can find out the fuller picture, where Latino parents, use their leadership to make room for that, that inclusion of Black parents, that across the board, whoever is involved, if your child is not, quote unquote, experiencing school discipline, and you think you have one of the quote unquote good kids, that interrogating that and actually having parents be in solidarity with families who are experiencing school discipline, i.e. the disparities, and centering them as, as the way to a solution. Again, that's leadership, it's practice, it is inclusion, participation, and respect. If we are waiting for the system to sort of figure it out, it's hard to imagine, because most of the time, if we are engaging principals, they literally think, they ask us to come in and deal with the disparities and help them figure it out. But the irony is that they never want to speak to their own parents. They never engage the parents. They don't ever want to go beyond the transaction of hoping they don't see these kids in their office and in the dean's office, but then they lament the fact that they're there, and yet, they won't go to the biggest resource that they have, which is to change their stance towards parents, bring in parents, don't shame parents, and actually respect parents as part of the solution. Even if it's difficult, even if they're non-responsive, making their effort to bring parents into the process. So I'm not sure if that's the answer everyone's looking for, but that's our perspective here at Cadre, that, and it doesn't mean that parents will solve everything. It just means that the disparities, once you get to the point where some of our schools have 6 suspensions in 1 year. They used to have 1,000, now they have 6. And it tends to be where 3 of those 6 are going to be African American without a fail. It could be 1 student, and that will be an African American student. It's almost predictable for us. And so at that point, the problem has gotten to the point where you really can bring the families in. There is absolutely no excuse for not engaging the parent, the family, the relatives, and trying to, bring a network of support to eliminate those 6 suspensions. So I hope that provoked everyone a little bit. I have not seen any, besides, some other things that are also very difficult to get implemented, like a culturally respectful curriculum, restorative justice, all these other alternatives to detention and suspension, services, programs, etc. That laundry list continues to be the wish list, so I'm not dismissing that way. But in the immediate, there really is no excuse at this point for not engaging the families. And that's really our stance here at Cadre. So I'll just keep going with, unless you want to add, I'll just.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to.
Yeah, I see another question about how long it took to collect this data.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, it took us probably several months to develop the public records requests with our parents. So that's the other thing, we tried to really involve them in that process. Then it took, I think, maybe close to 10 months, Ruth, to get all the pieces. And then we still had to fill in some things that we did not get from the district on our own.
Yeah.
So I would say it took about from beginning to end, where we actually could manipulate the data to create, worksheets and graphs and charts and whatnot to be able to analyze that, I think it literally took about 15 months altogether.
Yeah.
Maybe 12.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
As far as collecting the data in a more structured manner, I think that's why we do participatory research, because we always ask for data that they don't readily provide. And I'm not sure if there's a way to permanently get such data sets at the ready. I think that if a lot of different groups asked for that type of data and asked schools to actually produce evidence binders, if you will, I think that would definitely agitate the status quo, and they would become much more cognizant of the fact that they don't have a lot of evidence and they don't involve parents, and even if they have to doctor some evidence, it's very hard to doctor.
Yeah.
And that's what we had found. So, Ruth, you want to chime in?
Yeah. I mean, I think those are all great points, and I think definitely to the last piece about, when our schools and our districts are seeing sort of these, like, just the outcome numbers, just like the suspensions as the data that is being tracked, that they're not complicating, their idea about what's possible. And so I do think, really thinking about the relationship, with families, as Maisie has talked about, is so key, because that's been in all of the different spaces we're in, with district partners, that has been, really challenging for folks. So yeah, let's see. I see that we have had, and then just to the other point that May's making around, having the district collect this a different way. I think it's definitely true that, like Maisie shared in the beginning, that LA Unified has taken some steps to try to kind of document what schools are doing, but as Maisie shared, and what we've learned in the inquiry with our parent leaders, is it's pretty challenging for that review not to become really compliance based. And so I think, the lens around inclusion and respect is, really pushing whatever is being documented as our school sites to see that it actually stays meaningful, around a shift in relationships. Okay, and I see, Maisie, that we've had some other questions.
Yeah, I'm going to read them, but I'm going to answer several of them together, if that's
Great.
okay.
Great.
And I'll start with the three that sort of start with the one, any suggestions for parents who are unwilling to work and communicate with school staff? Another question was, it sounds like we have a large amount of parents participating. What's the actual number of parents who are involved? And there is also one related to, well, let me answer those two first, because I think the next one is paired nicely with the one that follows. But, I think, so cadre is, we go deep with a smaller number of parents rather than, have a ton of parents. So I would say we usually have about 24 parents that can stay involved over a year and a half of a process like this. So it's not a whole bunch, but at the same time, we go pretty deep, and it's pretty comprehensive. To sustain it over time, it really does enhance the consciousness and understanding of our parents. So we do ask for, we state up front that it's going to be a process, and it isn't for everybody. So what you need is a quote unquote a cadre of parents that will sort of do that lead thinking and lead analyzing and lead thinking, and be the first to sort of synthesize a parent point of view. As far as parents who are really alienated and don't want to work or communicate with school staff, what we tend to do with our parents is we tend to think about those parents. When I say theoretically, I don't mean it like academically. I mean, asking our parents to have to think about the parents who might not want to speak to schools and literally are just so frustrated or so detached that despite our theories about parents being included, there'll always be those parents who don't necessarily want to come to the table. And what we have tried to do is not so much speak for those parents, but include those parents in our narrative of what including parents means. So for instance, there are, if our parents can have compassion for those parents, and this isn't about like good behavior versus bad behavior when it comes to participating with the school, but it's really looking at the fact that our system of education has alienated so many families that it's just not that simple to say, hey, okay, now we want to involve parents differently. Here we go. You're invited. You're welcome to this, this, and that. And why don't you all come? And that somehow that's going to magically turn into more participation. So what we have looked at is what kind of relationship building it would take for cadre parents to build a relationship with those parents. What kind of compassion does it take to build that relationship? And even if they don't want to come, how can we represent their experiences? How can we sort of take care of those experiences in what we are talking about? So if you go to our report, you'll see that we are specifically asking for schools to include parents who had very egregious discipline violations, meaning that they didn't get positive behavior support, they didn't get restorative justice, or if they did, it didn't work, and their kids are still got arrested by police or still got suspended, continue to get suspended, feel like they're being singled out. Like those are the parents that we need to speak to. And as hard as it may be to get them there, or for the school and the parent to have, a dialogue, that's where the kryptonite will be, and that's where the rising tide can lift all boats. And so it is about our parents, sort of holding space for those parents, even if they are not physically present. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's what we call it's our definition of parent solidarity with other parents. So I hope that was helpful. But I think what it is that keeping in mind that what we're demanding as far as parent inclusion, we are not demonizing the parents that don't want to do that, don't want to participate. We are asking the system to fundamentally turn itself inside out and prioritize the people that they least want to deal with, which is parents. Now there's a couple of questions that to me go a little bit together, but it's about cultural competency, valuing different ways of being with, in relationship with non-white students. And then another question about data that focuses on discipline and its impact on Native youth. There is data focusing on, just about suspensions. So there's probably not as much qualitative data per se about school discipline and its very negative, harsh impacts on Native youth, but it is starting to emerge. I don't know if you know of any, but I am starting to see more and more debate, dialogue, panels, etc. But I don't think there's been a bevy of publications per se. But everyone who does look at discipline disparities on a regular basis regularly names both African American and Native youth as the most, as the ones experiencing the greatest disparities. And I think cultural competency is, that's the rub. and actually, again, if you can censure the inclusion of parents as sort of the biggest way to agitate cultural competency, that's what we'd like you to picture, that if in fact you have to engage parents, and if in fact there's a premium on engaging parents, you will inevitably figure out how where the competency questions and the incompetency lies. A lot of times, unfortunately, young people do not have the power to name that, and parents, our hope is that parents can be in solidarity with their young people and be able to name where their cultural incompetency really lies. And so if you are involving the most marginalized parents of a school by looking at the parents whose kids are still getting discipline and involving them in a targeted way, then it should produce a different kind of relationship. Uh, and there is a follow-up question about SARBs, school attendance review boards. And, not to say that they don't work, because they're supposed to work, but in many ways, that's the only time a parent is called is for, some kind of school success team or SARB. But by that point, there's been such little engagement of the parent leading up to that point that unfortunately, they are often done out of compliance and almost as a technical step prior to expulsion or, some other form of removal. So unfortunately, we haven't seen them be used in a very positive way, and we certainly haven't, they should be used, because they in fact do reach out to the parents of the students who are exceptionally marginalized, but we just have not seen that approach.
And on the SAR point, this is Ruth, I would also add that we've been a part of some efforts in the last couple years in dialogue with other LA County partners where, our allies in LA County Office of Education, have really shared when they look at the, at a macro level at the SARB data, that by and large, a lot of the issues connected to attendance were, unmet mental health needs and service issues. And so, when we think about what's happening at the school site, a student has missed a lot of school before they're getting to a SARB. And so I would just, challenge it as the most appropriate place for service connection. I see the point that there's folks there who aren't at the school site, but I think that it's really about, how does the school community, come together around student, needs and family needs.
There is another question here going back to the type of data that we collected, that the districts normally don't provide. And then coupled with that, who should be seeing that data after we're sort of done analyzing it. So I would go back to our what I call our what we shorthand call binder data. Again, this was what we got through our public records request. So while we requested quantitative data, longitudinal data around discipline, namely suspensions, we literally asked schools to show us evidence that they had implemented, 3 of the 8 best practices under SWP-S. So we narrowed it down to 3 of the best practices, and then we asked in this to, give us evidence, show us that you actually have parents at your meeting, show us that what you discussed at these meetings, show us what decisions you made at these meetings, show us where you're collaborating with family. So that is data that hardly anybody collects, but that's always the missing piece. And those of us who advocate and organize, we know that the process is where everything sort of falls through the cracks. So we are actually, this is our second time doing that, requesting what we consider documentation of process, of inclusion, of participation. And quite frankly, this is probably the data collection that really could be used for lots of other areas of advocacy, so not just school discipline. Mm-hmm. There's so many policies that mandate parent involvement, and so it really could be transferred and applied to a lot of other scenarios. And we did put out the report for everyone to consume, and so as far as who should look at it, we think everyone should look at it, because and our data analysis that does call, if you will, the schools out for their lack of parent inclusion, that tends to be what the school district is most defensive about. And so we do make sure that they see it and that they wrestle with it, and then we make demands around inclusion and participation after that. So I think we all often hear, hey, parents, young people need to be at the table. But we're really trying to push the envelope, like, okay, once we get to the table, what do we have to, we have to change what the table is and how the table operates. And it's no longer, unfortunately, it's no longer enough just to be at the table. Having just one parent is at the table, sometimes it's not enough. You need a coordinated set of parents who are at a lot of different tables, and can bring data back into how their tables are working, and we can raise bigger questions about whether parents are fully being included.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Maisie, that folks in other school districts, whether you have, really clear indicators or policies in your district about school-wide PBIS, that no matter what, there's, supposed to be a collaborative process around your safe school plan. And like Maisie's saying, there are just numerous other parent involvement requirements. So to do a Public Records Act request to really push and look in a much more nuanced way about what is actually happening, and is our relationships and power being built with parents, could happen in any district.
And while we're on that, there was a question. I'm going to go back to the Native youth data in a second, but the question related to the collaborative process of developing a PRA with parents, what kind of prep it took place. I hate to sound like a broken record, but we, and I'm going to invite Ruth to fill, compliment me on my answer, just add to it. But we really just started with what questions, what are parents curious about? And then we sort of distill, like, okay, there's data for that, there isn't data for that. So this is the second time we did it. We did this 8 years ago, and we pretty much replicated it again for this last report. And most of it stems from a dialogue with our parents about, they take their experiences, and then we look and we do our best to ask questions of what's a data point there. So parents say, yeah, I went to the meeting, or I asked my principal when the PBIS meeting is, and they told me they don't know yet. And so something like that turned into, can you give us evidence that you even had the meetings? Right. That was 8 or 9 years ago. This time around, they have their meetings. Our parents' experiences from those meetings. No, they didn't experience any data being discussed at those meetings. So that actual experience from a parent led to us including in the, in the PRA, give us evidence that you actually discuss data at your meetings. That resulted in agendas, people trying to send us whatever handouts they sent out at that meeting. And as you can imagine, it was very hard to provide that evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right on, Maisie. I mean, we obviously do kind of constant work with each other, of Maisie's organizing team and our team, but it really is framed, and it's a very collaborative process with parents identifying their experience, and like Maisie's saying, that kind of back and forth about, is there a data point for this? Is that something to be tracked? Like we do all of that together, so the parents are with us in understanding, here's what we know the district is tracking, so that what then the Public Records Act request that comes out of it, the parents are already like fully informed and own, okay, these are the points we brought up that we still need to push for that to even be tracked, or those kind of different points. So thanks for that. Great question.
And then there's another, not another, but a reinforcement of the fact that Native youth data needs to be gathered and that it's intentionally forgotten, and you're absolutely correct. And you have no argument from me, so I hope that, I actually hope that some of what we've described, can be applied to break some new ground around data collection for our groups that are completely, made invisible. So by all means, I think, I think participatory research is what's needed to actually bring the Native youth experience much more into the center of our debate and our movement. Okay, so far I think we've addressed all the questions. There's a couple of folks responding to one another. I don't know if there are other questions, but I think we have more time. Yes, Ruth?
Yeah, we still do have more time. Um,
Yeah.
and I, just wanted to add, as someone who's gotten to observe this very powerful process with Cadre, and how, how much parents are complicating data. When Maisie shared, that parents selected these parts of school-wide PBIS around data-based decision making, the involvement of families and the team, it's been extremely transformational, and just really exciting to witness what parents can do with being able to actually sit with their school's discipline data, and to complicate it from, their experience. So, that's just something that I think, folks in other communities could think about starting to bridge, with their school sites, and ask for dialogues around data. So let's see, I'm seeing if I'm asking any other questions. Um, but if not, that's okay. Okay, we have another comment. Um,
Yeah, and it's about
read all the
involving stakeholders, right? And LCAP, LCFF. I'm not sure if everybody, some of you may not be in California, but it's essentially LCAP, LCAP stands for Local Control Accountability Plan, and LCFF, Local Control Funding Formula. And it is our version of it's our educational funding model that is intended specifically to direct resources to certain groups of students who are historically underserved. And then the accountability for that sort of targeted funding is the plan that all schools and entire districts must submit every year. And school climate is one of the indicators on that plan. And so we have elevated school climate to something that should be part of school budgeting and school outcomes. And there should be data at the end of every school year showing how schools invested their specific LCFF funding for the carve out that's supposed to positively benefit those certain groups of students. Mm-hmm. But I would say that we've been sorely disappointed in LA as far as the lack of data about what they've actually spent on school climate. And by all means, the participatory way that we have monitored our school discipline policy victories, as I mentioned before, can absolutely be readily applied to monitoring just about anything else. And I think the trick, though, is committing to it being participatory and with parents, and certainly with young people as well. And I think it has huge potential for young people, and I know many youth organizing groups who do it with young people. But when parents literally have the power to not sign things or to hold schools accountable at a whole nother level, we hope that we can figure out a way where there's just more capacity to do it with parents. It's not the kind of participation that, it's not expedient, it's not efficient, it isn't done en masse. But we do believe that a handful of parents who are very proficient with this can actually change the game and change the terrain for lots of other parents. And that's sort of how we look at it, is that they aren't used to dealing with parents in this way. And so imagine if we had really rigorous public records requests for data about inclusion and participation across the board, and what that might do to actual practice at school sites if they knew that we were monitoring that, inclusion and participation, and whether or not parents were privy to the information to be privy to. There was a question about, go ahead, Ruth, if you want.
Oh no, I was just going to say, that's great. You got it all. I don't have anything to add. That's such great.
All right. And this is one question about encouraging teachers to become more willing to accept SWP bias as a valid approach. Uh, and it's not off topic, no worries. I think, I would just say that while most of our research sort of, it feels like it's aimed at administrators, we actually believe that what we've developed really applies to educators in particular as well. And in our report, we do end with a call to action that sort of, for every stakeholder group, we really specifically have a call to action of, I guess, baby steps, but there's certainly individual educator actions and orientations that they can start to carry that helps them be much more connected to SWP PBIS implementation. So for instance, it just takes organizing. So it's not, I don't know, encouragement. I think it's just straight organizing teachers, educators. For instance, asking educators if they know about the discipline data regarding their own students. If any of their own students been suspended, have they, whether it's if they're in primary, and it's just understanding their own students' experiences. If they're in high school, they may only have it for one period, but not know that they come into their class with being a quote unquote discipline disparity, if you will. A lot of educators, do not actively seek out an understanding of SWPBIS, and so when it is implemented with a compliance orientation, educators resent it. Mm-hmm. And it's human to understand why that happens, but then they don't ask any questions beyond that. So we do believe, after monitoring SWPBIS here in LA for over a decade, that there's absolute resistance because it's doled out as compliance. And very few people are making and connecting the dots to instruction, to classroom climate, to their ability to have relationships with their own students and parents. And I think one thing that's completely undervalued is SWPBIS's potential. If you actually lived up to it and you did your best and embody it every day, it could also be the way to help you have very healthier relationships with the families and the parents. But we compartmentalize it as if SWPBIS is not parent engagement and that parent engagement is not SWPBIS, when in fact, we put forth that is one and the same.
Yeah, agreed. And it's making me think of the case studies we did in our initial shadow report, and seeing at the schools that were really fully embodying and realizing the promise of SWPBIS, that they also did a lot to cultivate their relationships between teachers and have a space for teachers to be, supported in growing this practice and shifting it. So I think Maisie's right on that if something is kind of given to your school site from a compliance frame, or, we sent 3 people to a training and no one else really knows what's going on. So just thinking about, how a school community can really look at supporting all of the actors involved in this process.
And the main frame that we have to sort of challenge is that it's about not suspending kids. So if that's how it's presented, it's inherently that teachers feel like they're losing control of their classroom. But that's not actually what it is. And one of the ways we actually got the teachers union to support it, the first, when we first got it passed, they in theory thought that they could basically hold administrators more accountable for providing the supports that they need. Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, that has not translated to huge solidarity either. But I think, in many ways, if we start to see it as actually, there's so much emphasis now on relationship building as part of, changing school climate, and relationship building as sort of the source of solutions for some of our more intractable situations. And we believe SWPBIS, similar to restorative justice, but SWPBIS is an entire framework. And if a school is fully implementing it, it would have lots of alternatives to suspensions. It would have proactive problem solving and problem identification. It would have relationship with families so that when things uh, escalated, there was already a relationship to do collaborative problem solving and to, do as little harm as possible to the student and the family. There's data that should be regularly reviewed to measure progress, and the schools could just be honest with their own data and look at it as not as a threat but as a prompt to get better. It's all in the SWP based framework.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, we think it's really an operating system for a whole school, that it really isn't about school discipline only, but it definitely is focused on eradicating school discipline as a deterrent to learning and successful schools. But everything that it is in it, all the best practices are really just best practices for a good, healthy school, period. And a lot of teachers are not being told that. So.
Yeah. Great points. I was just trying to track that some other things have come in.
Yes.
So let's see. Some positive affirmation. Thank you. Just trying to scroll through it all. A suggestion from Dan about, crossing different data from Cal schools. That's a great point. Then a question from Sylvia, are we also keeping a watch on CCA and the need to keep a prison inventory, and if the schools are acknowledging their part in this? Okay, there's some different things to unpack there. I mean, I think that, we definitely are with several of our other partners in the Dignity in Schools campaign, making the link to the criminalization of young people, how parents are totally left out of the process if students are interrogated by the police or, arrested. So our lens has been more on trying to, document the inappropriate role of law enforcement in schools. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Maisie.
No, I think you covered it. But the critical question is sort of if the schools are acknowledging their part in all this. I think all of us as a collective movement that have been working to end the school to prison pipeline and continue to make, I think we have made some headway. I just don't, I don't think schools like to accept the responsibility of it. And I think there are broader, more critical questions as well about whether schools accept the responsibility related to eradicating poverty. And I think that's a long conversation we don't have time for today, but it shows up in school discipline. This connection obviously shows up the most clearly in school discipline, and who they discipline, for what reasons, how frequently, and how they treat the family, or don't even include the family. And it essentially looks at some students as, it's almost like wards of the state, if you will, or and just let's do with them what we think needs to be done with them, and we won't even tell the family. So we're not sure if we can stop this trend without parents, to be honest. Certainly young people have to be organized, but there has to be some adult to adult, challenge. And so we do see our at least for Cadre, we do see our organizing of parents to hopefully contribute to, add some stopgap, add a different constituency that can stop this. But it requires a lot of work because, we have to work with parents and ask them to consider not calling the police or finding a different solution. And a lot of times it's parents who have to be organized to recognize that sometimes the things they're asking for, may be against their own interests in the long run, that they may feel like good measures in the short term, but they support some things in the long run that actually make, make life hard to live. So
Yeah.
so working with parents to sort of unpack all this and actually look not at so much their role in it all, but their ability to interrupt it, and to elevate what parent organizing and what parent participation in schools mean. When there is a school to prison pipeline, and that is the de facto system that most kids are in, most kids of color, what does parent participation really mean? It means something completely different than just approving the budget, just knowing what classes your kids need. It means a lot of other things. And we're definitely trying to advance the thinking on that and ask people to take parent participation to a whole, really regard it as a major part of the transformation of schools.
Great. Well, that sounds like a pretty good last important point to end. Oh, okay. We just got another question. I was thinking that's such a nice last word, Maisie. Okay. This question is, have we ever thought about creating a curriculum for students to be taught in schools the same as sex education so that students understand they have rights and how to react in situations? I mean, I think that's a great point, just like the frame around that Maisie has shared around what's the relationship in schools around parent participation, same, with our young people being empowered by their education. And we do have, several other youth organizing partners who are doing that, but, it's from an organizing lens with bodies of students versus, actually school sponsored curriculum. But I think that's a great point about, needing to empower young people as well.
There is a comment about restorative justice being part of school curriculum, and I want to share or issue a friendly, question about how we have restorative justice and SWPBIS work more in concert with each other. So we definitely know that there are I think there's a lot more people involved in restorative justice, restorative practices implementation, and sort of getting it out to more people, expanding it, if you will. And we truly believe at Cadre that SWPBIS has to also be the basic operating system of a school. So the entire school is marshaled around prevention and positive support. So that restorative justice also has like a landing pad, if you will. And that it also then becomes to coalesce as the main practice of the school. I do know restorative justice diehards will tell me that is the whole point of restorative justice. And I'm not disagreeing. I'm just sort of I think there are a lot of levers that we can pull. And many schools actually do have SWPBIS as part of policy. But because it's so hard to see it in action, restorative justice definitely feels more hands-on and more concrete. But what SWPBIS can do is leverage RJ into school-wide practice. It can sort of call for data to be collected about implementation and certainly about impact. It can elevate restorative justice so that it's implemented at all levels, of the spectrum of behavior, if you will, even the most egregious. And when restorative justice has a really, really positive impact, it really can sort of be the glue, if you will, to proving that SWPBIS should be the operating system of schools. So this is not to stoke any kind of competition between models, because that's not how we view it. But we definitely view many of the same capacities for building relationship and creating trust that are so necessary in restorative justice to be also the fundamental component of SWPBIS. So it's at this point we're really just trying to put it all together. And in our report, we do have a vision of schools sort of mocked up as a like a dreamscape kind of thing, and it does have sort of all these things put together. And there's a graphic, like there's a visual about it. But it by all means is trying to, it's asking schools to up the ante and make positive support, if you will, really the framework for everything. And I think that has happened in academic intervention, and less so in behavioral intervention. So.
Great. Thank you. And thank all of you for your really engaged and thoughtful questions. Just want to remind folks that they can stay in touch with us at the email address that we shared, and we're happy to connect more with you around our toolkits and this specific work that we do together with Cadre. Oh, and yeah, just want to acknowledge that there's some a comment being shared around restorative justice as prevention, and I think it's to what Maisie's sharing, that these systems can really work together. So yeah, so thank you for a really great conversation, and please feel free to reach out to us with any other questions, but really appreciate the discussion that we've had today. We will send this recording and this PowerPoint within the week. So